From the New Arts and Media Studios in River West, the greatest neighborhood in the world, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. And Neera Tanden has removed herself from her nomination as head of the Office of Management and Budget. Okay, that's fine. We talked about her a few days ago, and we expected this would happen. And Joe Biden has promised that he will find a place for her. Okay, we also suggested that. Again, Joe's listening to the show. I know he listens every day. You and I are the radical left, and Joe Biden takes his marching orders from us. We're the radical left-wing socialists, and Joe Biden is our puppet. All right. And speaking of Joe Biden, he made an interesting announcement last night. He changed the deadline by 2 months. Just a few days ago, he said by the end of July, the U.S. would have enough vaccines for every American. Not that they'd be in their arms. We kind of went through all that. But it's no longer end of July. It's now end of May. Just getting on it. He's got his shoppers out doing the work, making the deals, cutting the deals. All right, get them paid for, get them delivered. So now it's by the end of May, 2 full months earlier than we thought just a few days ago. The downside of this, and I suppose I shouldn't be a complainer, great. We've pushed it by 2 months. Now it's end of May. Maybe another 2 months to get it in everybody's arm. But still, as happy as that makes everybody, even given the speed of all this so far, I'll never, for as long as I live, understand why every single pharmaceutical company in the nation, in the world, wasn't on this. And that they weren't forced by law. Here in the U.S., what's it called? The Defense Production Act. If I had been president, I would have invoked the Defense Production Act immediately, and I would have ordered every single pharmaceutical company in the United States to get on this with all available personnel. Drop everything else you're doing. Maybe you're working on improvements to the new boner pill. You know what? Drop that for a while. We can do without that for a little bit. Maybe somebody was working on a new design for Flintstones vitamins, a new upgrade. You know what? We can postpone that for a year. Whatever you're working on right now, everybody drop it. Everybody get on the vaccine. And as soon as you have something worthwhile, you share it with every single other pharmaceutical company. It's all open source. And as soon as we've got something, it's shared with everyone. There's no such thing as secret sauce here. So everybody's on it. Every pharmaceutical is on this in every country. We have international agreement. It's top number one priority. Everything else can wait. And then instead of Pfizer and then, AstraZeneca in the UK, the other one, I forget, now Johnson & Johnson's just come on board. They have separate vaccines in China and in Russia. But to my mind, it should have been open source by law, by universal command. I looked it up. Top 25 pharma companies. Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Novartis, Roche, Bristol Myers Squibb, Merck, Eli Lilly, AstraZeneca. It goes on and on. Every single damn one of them should have been on this. And as soon as we had a formula, it should have been shared and gone into production. We got people dying here. We're still close to 2,000 people a day, even though we have dropped from the third peak down to about the level of the second peak. We still damn close to 2,000 people a day. So screw your warp speed and all your bragging. I don't know why this wasn't mandated nationally and internationally, and every single damn company got on board. I just looked up the top 25. I don't even know how many pharmaceutical manufacturers there are in the world. Obviously, there's more than 25, if you can name the top 25. So I don't get it. Okay, so there's the good news about the vaccines, and yet, despite all the good news, my complaining about it. Because we just needed to get on this as quickly as possible, and we still do, because states like Texas, oh my God, are you kidding me right now? Associated Press. Texas on Tuesday became the biggest state to lift its mask rule, joining a rapidly growing movement by governors and other leaders across the U.S. to loosen COVID-19 restrictions despite pleas from health officials not to let their guard down yet. My God, how stupid can... Oh, Lord, this is making me nuts. The Lone Star State will also do away with limits on the number of diners who can be served indoors, said Republican Governor Greg Abbott, the star of the recent CPAC in Florida. Yeah, they love Abbott. They love DeSantis. The governors of Michigan, Mississippi, and Louisiana likewise eased up on bars, restaurants, and other businesses Tuesday, as did the mayor of San Francisco. Every health expert you talk to will say this is not the time. This is not the time to ease up. We're getting there. We're seeing progress. We got to keep our eye on the prize here for just a couple more months, especially with the new strains. We don't really know yet. And by we, I mean they, I mean the experts. I don't know anything. But when a consensus is reached in the scientific community, damn it, I'm going to listen to them. And there is a consensus. It's virtually unanimous that this is not the time to let up. What are we going to do with these people? Speaking of these people, a couple small items we didn't talk about regarding CPAC over the weekend. And one you probably heard about. There was this massive booing when a couple of organizers came on stage, the people who organized the event, pleading with everyone to put on their masks because it's required by Hyatt, the hotel where they were having their conference. In order to get the gig, in order to host your event, you have to wear masks. And these two poor people who were forced to go out on the stage and give this little announcement were just literally booed off the stage raucously. So the entire CPAC was completely devoid of masks and of social distancing. Of course. And one more note about CPAC. The design of the stage, have you heard about this? The stage was, well, if you're curious, you've got a phone in your hand probably right now. Just look up Nazi symbol CPAC, and it'll come right up. Their stage was the exact, it didn't suggest the shape of this Nazi symbol. It was exactly the shape of this Nazi symbol. Something called the Odal rune. Odal rune. So not the swastika, but the Nazis' SS symbol, and recently resurfaced among modern American white supremacists. So really very difficult to claim this was just a coincidence. My guess, and it is a guess, is that Matt Schlapp, I know, that's a funny name. He's the head of the, what do you call it, the conservative union or whatever they call it, the people who organize CPAC. He was just outraged at the accusation that they would do such a thing. So my speculation is that, yeah, he probably didn't know. But somewhere along the chain of command, in the decision-making process, the design of the stage, somebody was having some fun with this, and they knew exactly what they were doing. Again, they probably had to count on the fact that the big bosses didn't really quite get it. They didn't understand, or they wouldn't care. I don't know. But it's just impossible. There's no way you can believe that that was a mistake or a coincidence. When the stage was in the exact proportions, the exact design of this Nazi SS symbol. But this is literally what the Republican Party is now. This is literally what conservatives are now. This is why I keep saying and I keep repeating, and we have to understand that they are no longer a legitimate party. They've jumped the shark. They've gone off the deep end. They are American Nazis. They're anti-democratic. They're white supremacist nationalists. That's not even an argument anymore, which is exactly why Joe Biden and the Democrats in Congress, both the House and the Senate, need to just proceed from here on out as though the Republican Party doesn't even exist, because it doesn't, in a sense. There is no legitimate opposition party in Washington, D.C. Joe Manchin is the opposition party. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. I want to talk about that in a second. I want to talk about what's going on with the COVID bill. But before I get there, I got to talk about Christopher Wray. Christopher Wray, of course, is the director of the FBI. He was invited to speak with the Judiciary Committee because they do that occasionally. They talk to the director of the FBI. Of course, once he's in there, the senators can talk about whatever they want. But he was invited specifically to talk about January 6th. We haven't heard from him yet about January 6th. And, of course, there are a lot of questions to ask, especially regarding the run-up, the few days prior to January 6th. And why weren't you ready? Where was the intelligence on this? How come nobody could anticipate this attack? And then, of course, the day itself, requesting the National Guard. What was your role in all of this? Well, he didn't really have any answers today. If you want to go back and watch it on C-SPAN, you're not going to get much satisfaction. It was a lot of this and a lot of that, and we have to look into it, and we have to do better next time, and it was very disappointing on that front. But here's the news I want to talk about. The Republicans on the committee used the opportunity, for all intents and purposes, to be the defense lawyers for the insurrectionists. Quite literally. I know I overuse the word literally. I know I do. When I air check my shows, I think you use that word too much. But I feel I have to say it because often the things we learn about the Republicans are so over the top, they're so outrageous, they're so unbelievable that it sounds like I'm using hyperbole or metaphor. They couldn't really be doing this. No, they really are. They are literally doing this. Ted Cruz, a co-conspirator of the insurrectionists, a co-inciter with the Orange Menace, used his time to grill Christopher Wray about Black Lives Matter protests over the summer. And you and I have been over this time and time again. We know full well that Black Lives Matter protests were not violent, that any and all violence that did occur were from one of three categories: local agitators, local troublemakers, the same people who come out after a Super Bowl win, the night of the Super Bowl, the night of the World Series winner, the night of the World Cup winner. Every damn time you're going to find cars turned over and set on fire and windows broken and people looking for fights. So over the course of the summer, it was like 20 Super Bowls. It was like 20 World Series. It was like 20 World Cups all rolled into one every night. We've pointed out many times that the violence happened the first night or two of the protests, and then they went on throughout the summer without incident. So that was category number one. Your basic hooligans who had nothing to do with the movement. Category number two, as has been proven by Christopher Wray's own FBI, insurgents, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, militia, white supremacists, coming in, making trouble, looking for violence. They want to fight Black Lives Matter. They want to fight the cops. They want to swing their bats. So we know, without controversy, for a fact, that they were category number two of the violent factions. Category number three, the police themselves. Once again, established, proven facts. This is not spin. This is not opinion. The police themselves instigated violence. By the time you get done with these three categories, any violence perpetrated by legitimate actual protesters becomes so minuscule, it's comparable to the amount of fraud in the most recent election. Yeah, you're going to find isolated cases. Of course you are. But none of it will reach the level of any consequence. So, I know I'm arguing old arguments. We've heard this before. But I feel I need to reiterate this because the news last night and the news this morning you're going to hear is Ted Cruz and others making these, once again, these bogus false equivalencies. So that's how Ted Cruz, co-conspirator Ted Cruz, co-inciter Ted Cruz, chose to use his time to further propagate lies. And by creating this false equivalence, by putting his entire focus elsewhere, he is in effect and in fact excusing, defending the insurrectionists of January 6th. The Republicans are not a legitimate party. And he wasn't the only one. Lindsey Graham chose to spend his time pretending that there is an organization called Antifa and pleading with Christopher Wray to designate them as a domestic terrorist organization. Now, anybody who knows anything about this knows that Antifa is not a terrorist organization because they are literally not an organization. And to the extent people communicate online believing in the values of Antifa, their sole purpose is to fight fascists, to protect democracy. But that's how Lindsey Graham spent his time. Ben Sasse used his entire time trying to refute the idea that domestic terrorists, specifically white nationalist domestic terrorists, are the number one threat to America. The numbers bear this out. They've been telling us this for quite a while. In fact, they've been telling us this since 2009. Right-wing, white supremacists, militias, number one threat, domestic terrorists. So how does Ben Sasse spend his 10 minutes? Well, foreign jihadists are still the number one threat. Isn't that correct? No. Christopher Wray had to correct him on that. What about MS-13? Of course, the gangs who come from the southern border. What about North Korea? He just was looking for any and every possible bad player to do his little what about game, to in effect and in fact excuse or deflect from right-wing white nationalists. Josh Hawley, the now infamous Josh Hawley, giving the power fist to the insurrectionists, caught on camera, also spent his entire time grilling Christopher Wray, acting in every respect like a pit bull defense lawyer. It was something to see. To Christopher Wray's credit, he didn't really let him get away with it. He stuck to his guns. He told the truth. Although you know what? He will not say, Christopher Wray will not utter the words white supremacist. One time I heard him say something to the effect, what was something like, what you would call white supremacists, referring to the senators, talking to one of the Democratic senators. No, he uses the phrase racially motivated. He calls them domestic terrorists, he calls them militia, and he calls them racially motivated. Can't come out with the words white supremacist. Well, hell, I'm racially motivated. When I talk about combating white supremacy, whether it be through institutions or in our own hearts and minds, yeah, I'm racially motivated. That's not much of a phrase. That's not a real accurate moniker. But he just couldn't do it. So, but otherwise, he told the truth. Democratic senators were forced then, after this really weird defense lawyer display by the Republicans, some Democratic senators were sort of forced to take their time to ask very specific questions of the FBI director. Is there any evidence that you know of that the FBI has uncovered that there was widespread fraud enough to impact the last election? And to his credit, Christopher Wray answered in no uncertain terms, no, not a single shred of evidence pointing in that direction. Director Wray, was there any evidence that you found showing that Antifa or Black Lives Matter or so-called fake Trump supporters had anything to do with the January 6th attack? His answer, again, unequivocal. None, zero evidence to that. These aren't left-wing talking points. These are official findings. So for whatever headlines you're seeing this morning regarding the Christopher Wray testimony, for me that was the standout headline. Further evidence, further proof that the Republican Party is no longer legitimate. They're a white supremacist, nationalist party. They not only incited the insurrection of January 6th, but now they are literally, use that word again, literally defending it. Which now brings us to the COVID relief package. What I want to emphasize here in our time remaining is to just continue with this idea that the Republican Party is no longer legitimate. And to beg Joe Biden, I know you're listening, it's time to just wave goodbye. That train has left the station. Any kind of bipartisanship, any kind of cooperation, reaching across the aisle, I don't know, you can try again on infrastructure. Maybe down the road you can try again. But on this, it's all over. The House passed the COVID bill with exactly 0 Republican votes. 76% approval from the American people. 60% approval from self-proclaimed Republicans. And exactly 0 votes from the 200-plus Republicans in the House of Representatives. Republican senators are vowing to fight it with everything they have. They are promising unanimous nay votes. So, Joe and the Democrats, this is just really how you have to conduct business now. For the moment, through reconciliation, we can pass COVID, and that, thankfully, is pretty much a done deal. That's going to happen. But there's one other thing you can do. You can save the $15 minimum wage. Just because the parliamentarian has decided that it doesn't quite fit the so-called Byrd rule, and you can look that up. That's the provision in the Senate rules that says when you use reconciliation, all items must have a direct impact on the budget. In the opinion, and that's all it is, the opinion of the Senate parliamentarian, the $15 minimum wage did not meet that requirement. It's certainly debatable. You and I talked the other day about how I'm not sure how it doesn't impact the budget. Can you imagine the tax revenues that will be gained by implementing a $15 minimum wage? Can you imagine the savings from the U.S. budget because of all the food stamps and housing assistance that will no longer be required from people who make a living wage? So just as a layperson looking at the requirement here, I don't know how she came to the conclusion that this has no impact on the budget. I think it's an enormous impact. Well, okay, so I lost that argument. But the whole thing is, the Senate parliamentarian has no power except to advise. So the way it works is, Senate, if you decide to go this route, and I think you ought to, go ahead, include the $15 minimum wage as a provision of your COVID bill. What happens next is the Republicans will stand up and raise an objection to that item. We object. You can't do that. It doesn't meet the requirements of the Byrd rule, named after Senator Byrd, who fashioned this back in, I think, 85, added it to the act. Anyway, so that's how it works. It's like a Perry Mason trial. Warren Burger stands up and says, I object. What happens next? The judge rules. Either sustains the objection, and in this case, sustaining that objection on the grounds of the Byrd rule, would then require a 60-vote override to allow the $15 minimum wage provision to go forward. Obviously, that wouldn't happen because you couldn't get 10 Republicans to override this sustained objection, right? Okay. So, the 15 minimum goes away. But what if the judge does not sustain the objection? What if the judge says, objection denied? Well, then we just continue with the proceedings. Nothing can be done. The Republicans have no other recourse. And of course, the judge in this case is Kamala Harris, presiding president of the Senate. All she has to do when Mitch McConnell or Ted Cruz or Rand Paul or whatever one of those jokers wants to stand up and say, I object, you just got to look him in the eye and say, objection overruled. Boom, done. But there's still a problem. Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, Joe Manchin of West Virginia have promised to vote against the entire COVID-19 bill if the $15 minimum wage provision remains. 2 Democrats. And this is the reason that so far Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are saying, nope, we won't overrule that objection. We will accept that objection and we will toss out the $15 minimum wage provision. Because we can't get the vote anyway. If we allow the provision to stand, we lose 2 Democratic votes and it's over anyway. So that's why we're not going to do it. Now, the argument against that, an argument, by the way, I should say I've been convinced of here in the last few days. Prior to that, I was just very sadly accepting the real state of affairs. Well, okay, we can't get Sinema, we certainly can't get Manchin, so I guess it's over. But the argument that's been made here in recent days is, nope, call their bluff. Call the bluff of Sinema and Manchin. Deny the objection, force the vote, make them vote no. Call their bluff. According to those making this argument, Manchin and Sinema will cave. They will provide votes 49 and 50, and then, of course, Kamala Harris will break the tie. Boom. $15 minimum wage. And so, oh my God. If you don't yet appreciate how important the $15 minimum wage is, if that somehow has escaped you, it's massive. Lifting people out of poverty, saving people's lives and livelihoods. And those who say, well, okay, maybe later, not during COVID. No, exactly the opposite. Millions of your fellow Americans can't put food on the table for their kids. They can't afford their medicine. They're on the brink of eviction. Many of them are already living on couches and in cars. Working people, forced to live on starvation wages. And Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin need every one of their colleagues and every one of their constituents to make that case, to get on the phone, to knock on their door, to get in their face and make the case and convince them once and for all. And of course, this is just one provision. The COVID-19 bill is massive, and every bit of it is required, is necessary, whatever the illegitimate Republican Party tries to tell you. So the argument goes, call their bluff. And I have come to agree with that argument here in recent days. This is exactly the way Joe and the Democrats have to proceed. You got 2 years. Nobody knows what's going to happen in 2022 with the election. It's too risky. You got 2 years to do everything. Do it. COVID relief right now. Green New Deal, infrastructure, immigration, election reform, tax the rich. You got to write up some whopping bills, pass them through reconciliation, and just act as though the Republicans don't exist, because that's pretty much the truth right now. They just don't exist. There is no opposition party currently in the United States. So that's what you got to do, starting right here, right now, with COVID relief, including the $15 minimum wage. All right, so there it is. There it is. It's going to be an interesting rest of the week here, and we'll see how this all progresses. Hang in there. Fight the fight. I love you. I'm Charles Purcell.